When we talk about podcast discoverability, there's really two buckets. There's things you do to the podcast to get it ready to be discovered, and then there's the promotions and outreach that you do. And honestly, of these two things, I think a lot of people skip over the podcast audio optimization that you can do. I'm not sure why, but I really want to go over this in detail in this video because I think these are some of the easier things that you can do to increase the ability for people to find your podcast without any work once it's released, once the episodes go live. So let's talk about your podcast discoverability optimization top 10. Let's do this. They are in order of the things that I usually look for when I have a new client or a new project that I'm working on, because these are the things that matter the most. Number one, podcast name. If your podcast does not have a keyword that people would search for to get to your topic in a podcast form, I mean, people are going to have a harder time finding you. It's just that simple. I know you want a creative, cute name or an interesting name or a serious, reputation building name. But if people can't find you, then that's not going to be strong discoverability. So what you want to do is have a keyword in your name that is connected to the content area. I know it feels obvious, and those of you that did it are like, come on, move on. What are the other 9? I'm getting there. But for those of you who have gone on the creative side and are struggling to grow your podcast, now's a good time to reconsider your podcast name. You can add on an extra word to what you already have. You can add on a phrase, but if you do more than that, it's keyword stuffing, and the platforms are wise to that stuff and they will start to penalize you, the algorithms and whatnot. So, I mean, don't do that. But you can do a tiny tweak to your name, and trust me, your listeners won't care. If anything, they will be happy that the community is getting bigger and that there's more people listening and commenting and all of those things that might be happening with your podcast. So, number one, make sure there's a keyword in your podcast name. Number two, description. And this is where I'll start sharing visuals. I'm going to show you a project I'm working on right now with some folks for last week in Denmark. It is, as you may guess, about living in Denmark. And yeah, it's a part news and part personal. They have a handful of regular co-hosts, and they have 2 of the co-hosts each week, and they take the top 3 news items and relate it to their daily lives, what they've heard, what they experience, what they know. They personalize the top 3 news items in Denmark. And so the description you'll see here, this is the back end of Buzzsprout. So you'll see here is the podcast title, and note it's about Denmark and they have Denmark in the title. Like I said, number 1. Number 2, this is the description. And this description, let me show you, goes in a number of different places. This is their podcast website on Buzzsprout. And the description you'll see, here are all the lovely co-hosts. And the description does go over here. That is also the description that ends up in podcast apps. It ends up in Apple, Spotify, literally anywhere that you have submitted your podcast to be distributed to will have this description. It might be truncated depending on the platform. Like it might not be the whole length if you do something slightly longer like we have here. It really depends on the platform. So what you really want to do is get the most important keywords first. We've got Denmark a couple of times, stories one here. Now that I'm looking at it, I need to put the word news in there. We mentioned that it's in English, even though it's Denmark, just in case folks are wondering, oh, I don't speak Danish. I mean, yeah. Internationals is a big word that's used to describe folks that live here but aren't from here. Global perspective. So there's a few keywords in there that people might use when they search for a podcast that would bring this podcast up. And that's what you want to do. You want to basically be answering people's searches. You want your podcast description to be answering people's searches. I know I said that twice. I said that twice for number 2, which is the description of your podcast, for a reason. you want to be found. And then the rest can be just additional details that if it gets cut off, it's no big deal. But if somebody wants to read more, it's there. So there you go. Even in just reviewing this, I realized I need to put news in there because it is the top 3 news that they're talking about. So thank you for that. Every time you review your description, you're going to fine tune it even more. And that's the advantage of constantly checking your stuff and seeing if it has what you need. So again, that description will end up in all of the podcast players. And if you send it over to YouTube, it will end up over there in the podcast part of YouTube as well. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2. Number 3 is the metadata in your audio files. Okay, so what you're looking at now is Hindenburg, which is the DAW that I use to edit, and this is a client of mine, and you're looking at the session properties. So this is the metadata that is attached to the audio. So when I render this audio file, this data will be attached to it and will come up in any player that accesses the data and shows it on a screen, whether it be a car stereo system or a TV or wherever it's played or wherever it's shown. So, I mean, the obvious stuff here is the episode name, which hopefully has some keywords in it that we'll talk about that really soon, actually. And then the podcast name, episode number is not really something that is super important for search, but probably more so for your own records. And the keywords here, you can add them here or in another place I'll show you in a minute. So those are the main bits. The other bits are more legal stuff and so on and so forth. But those are the main bits that'll help you with podcast discoverability. They'll help you optimize your podcast discoverability just in entering this stuff before you render your MP3 file. So that is number 3, the metadata in the audio files. Now that's in Hindenburg. You might be using a different DAW. You might be using Adobe, Audacity. Gosh, there's so many different ones out there. And they all have spaces to put your metadata. I promise you. It's just a matter of finding the chat, the video on YouTube that shows you how to do it and getting to know how to do it. And once you save your template for the audio, half of that will be on there, and then you just need to change the episode title and the keywords. Let me show you where else you can put the keywords. In most podcast hosts, they should give you the ability to add keywords to a specific episode. And you can see here down at the bottom, it says tags. Let me show you in edit mode. That might be more obvious here. Here you go. This area that shows tags, and here are some tags here. So if you, for some reason, can't enter keywords in the audio file in the metadata within your DAW, then you can add it to or through your podcast host, assuming that that is something that they have available. I can't imagine them not having it, but I can't speak for all podcast hosts because there's so many out there. So do it in one of the 2 places. You do not need to do it in both. I believe if you do it in both, it'll take one versus the other, and you'll have to figure out which one that is. And no, just put it in one of those 2 places. That's all you need. And number 4 is going to be episode titles. I have entire videos on this, and I'll link them in the show notes or video notes, depending on where you're consuming this. But let me just say, if you find this list so far to be helpful, can you do me a favor and do a quick like for me over on YouTube? Can you do a quick like on this video and go ahead and subscribe so you can actually find out more videos as I release them. Again, keywords. You want your titles to be results to searches that people do online. So you'll notice we have Denmark, the word Denmark, in a lot of these episode titles. Now, I took over here and up. Those are the episode titles that I've been doing. And I've been playing with different formats than here. You can see that before April 13th, they had the season and episode number before the title, and I actually moved it to the end. I would tend to not have it there at all, but so be it. I don't want to disrupt too much, but I do want to help with discoverability. My thing is, once somebody, let's say you're searching for the word Denmark in a podcast app, and then they find some podcast on Denmark. Okay, I just searched for Denmark and Podcast Addict, and you'll see there's a bunch of podcasts that come up, right? And then let's say I click on one. How to Live in Denmark is not a client, but I really like this podcast. And then you click on episodes. Can you see how many words you have there? Let's see. The first one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the seventh one gets cut off. The second episode, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words, and then it gets cut off. It gets the dot, dot, dot. I don't think that's coming through loud and clear visually, but I think you have a phone, you have a podcast app, you know what to look for. So your entire title is not going to show up. So if somebody finds your podcast because you have your podcast name has keywords in it that are relevant, they go into it, they start looking at the episodes, even if they search for an episode. Let's search for Christmas within this one. Yeah, there's still a bunch of them under Christmas. So even if I search within a specific podcast, there's still a bunch of episodes and the episodes are still getting cut off. So what you really want to do is not only make sure that there are keywords in your podcast episodes, but front load them. Front load what is in your episode so that people scanning like I just did will be able to actually get a feel for what's in that episode. If they know what's in the episode, they like what's in the episode, they're more likely to press play. So it's not just discoverability, it's like a few little steps beyond discoverability to play to get them to hit play. Number 5, I think you know already, is podcast directory. And there is a site that I keep talking about over and over and over when I talk about where to put your podcast. And I'll show you again because it bears repeating because I constantly run into people who don't have their podcast everywhere they can. And here you go. It's over on Pod News. How to add your podcast to every directory. Is it every directory in the world? You know, I don't know. There's probably more, but there's a lot of them. And James keeps this updated. And there are links. You can click on all of these links. Some of these might not be relevant to you depending on if there are certain regions that you're not really too worried about. But honestly, when I have a new client, I check that they're in all of them because you only have to submit your podcast once to directories. Yes, your podcast host probably submits your podcast to a number of different directories, but I have yet to sign up with a podcast host that submits you to everyone that exists. So if you want to be in more places where people are listening to podcasts, then distribute your podcast everywhere that you can. Number 6 is show notes. So show notes, I'm sure you know, we're back to last week in Denmark here. So you can see this is their Buzzsprout website. Here are the show notes. We also do chapters. We'll talk about those in a minute. And then we've got a bunch of links to all of the ways you can get involved in the community or find out more information and so on and so forth. All of that combined is actually considered show notes. But this summary part right here does not have to be very long, but it is scanned by different platforms for search. So you want to make sure, again, to have your keywords, especially in those first 1 or 2 lines, to make sure that when they scan them, they actually get the information that would make it easier to recommend your podcast to someone, to put your podcast in front of someone, because that's what you want. So make sure that your show notes start with keywords. Make sure that your show notes have keywords in the first line or 2. So number 7 is chapters. So I'll just show you right here. It'll be a little different depending on how you do it. You can do it in your DAW or you can actually do it over in your podcast host. So these are the chapters. Obviously, this is the time, 3 minutes and 46 seconds. And then here's the title, time, title, time, title. Keywords in the title. Law, driving, yes, trademarks, low-income sports clubs, DKK. We probably could have Denmark in more of these, but yeah, those probably could be better if I'm honest, but they're pretty good so far. So your chapters will not only help people skip around the podcast, which actually has been proven that when you give people the option to skip around, they're more likely to just keep listening. Some people might skip around, but also if they skip around, they tend to listen to more of your podcast than if they just gave up and were like, never mind, I don't know what the rest of this is. I'm just going to stop listening. So Yeah, there's that. So you can again, there's 2 ways you can do chapters. You can do them in the DAW and then render the file and they'll be in there, or you can do them in your podcast host. And different podcast hosts have different ways to do them. So if you want to know, if you want to walk through on how I add them, there's 2 different ways I add them in Buzzsprout. Leave a comment down below and I'll make a video on that. But chapters is a way to be discovered because those chapters are often used in search in podcast apps and possibly some other platforms as well. Speaking of over in on the website, you can see the next tab here. There's the show notes tab, there's a chapters tab, and there's the transcripts tab. About a year and a half ago, Apple started to generate AI transcripts for all podcasts on their platform. And a lot of podcasts are signed up with Apple and then go to all of these smaller podcast platforms. Now you can pick if you want your transcripts or Apple's transcripts to show up. And transcripts are being used to, you got it, to answer search queries. Queries, what am I, like 90 years old? Sorry, search terms, searches in different places. There we go. So you really want there to be accurate transcripts, especially if there's a specific, if your keyword is a word that is spelled wrong a lot of times, you want to spell it right because that'll help with people finding your podcast over another podcast that may not have actually cleaned up their AI transcripts. So it's a good idea to get at least your keywords ironed out in your transcripts. I mean, good transcripts would just be a good idea for accessibility purposes. You want people to be able to read the transcripts if they can't listen to the podcast itself. At minimum, make sure your keywords are in there and that they're spelled right. You can do Control F or Command F and search for your keyword if it's got a funky spelling and make sure it's spelled right. Make sure people's names are spelled right. And those transcripts will be useful for accessibility, but also for discoverability because they are being used in search already. They have been for a while now. 9, website. Let me show you a website. I'm not an SEO person, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but as a consumer of podcasts and someone that finds when I have a client that's struggling with discoverability, what I often find is that their podcast is hidden on their website. It's really hard to find, or it's tucked away in a menu that's just really, really not obvious. And people are familiar with play buttons. See the play button? See the play button? That is familiar. Because this project is heavier on the newsletter, the news newsletter, than it is on the podcast, at least for now. Ha ha ha. That is the information that is first on their website. And then they come down to this gorgeous play button with the option of the different episodes. But that play button is key. People are very familiar with the play button. So having your website prominently display your podcast is really good. And it also pulls on the episode metadata on the website in web searches and different kinds of things. So there's a lot of advantages on having a website other than your podcast website. Again, depending on how much resource and time and budget and all that kind of stuff you have for your podcast. If you have a website that's more than the podcast host website, get a play button on there because I guarantee you people will hit play more than if you didn't have a play button. Last one, social media links. There's a number of places that you can put your social media links. We have the listen links over here on the right. This is the Last Week in Denmark Buzzsprout website. And in the show notes, you can see here as part of our links, not only the email address and the Substack address, but we've got Instagram in right there in the show notes for every stinking episode. I can show you another episode. Let me show you another episode. Let's go to the second one here. Boom, there it is. There they are. This won't help with discoverability as far as search goes, like I've been talking about for a lot of the other ones, but If somebody listens to an episode and they follow you on a social media platform, they're probably more likely to listen to future episodes if they see your posts in that social media. And it's very hard to share things on the vast majority of podcast apps. But if you get them to follow you on your social media, they could repost or reshare or what have you, a post that you put about the podcast on there, and thereby exposing their followers to your social media posts. So, podcast optimization discoverability number 10, social media links. Get them into your stinking show notes. Give people the opportunity to actually connect with you in a space that has the ability to connect and engage and comment and do all of those things that social media does that podcast apps, generally speaking, don't do. I know there's one or two that do, but in the vast majority of circumstances, they don't. And so that's what social media really needs to, why social media really needs to be tied into your show notes. I know that's a part of show notes, which was number 6. However, it's so important that I'm making it its own at number 10. All right, so quick recap. Podcast name, description, metadata, and audio files. Episode title, directories is number 5. 6 is show notes. 7 is chapters. 8 is transcripts. 9, website. And 10 are your social media links. Those are the 10 things that I generally look for when I'm looking at folks who say, I'm stuck, I'm not growing, what's happening, what can I do? These are absolutely the top 10 things I look at first, and we spend quite a while fixing those before we get to anything else. Because sometimes the content needs to change, sometimes the branding's off, sometimes the CTAs are in the wrong place, but more times than not, these things will yeah, that's my messy list. I use paper. I do. I absolutely do. These 10 things will increase discoverability more than a lot of other things. Again, 2 buckets. Building up the information in the podcast so people can find you when they search, and then promoting and outreach. So working within the podcast, oh yeah, this is going to become a dance. Working within the podcast so that people can find you, so that the platforms can recommend you, all those kinds of things in the podcast. And then your outreach, your social media, your website, your live events in person, whatever you do as outreach. Doing both of those, okay, this is turning into something now. Doing both of those is important. And most people forget about these. Don't forget about these. These are the things that keep on giving well after an episode is published. Let me know if this helps. Let me know when this helps down in the comment section. Just let me know. I'd love to hear your stories. Love to hear them. If you need any help, you know where to reach me, saneandsimplepodcasting.com. All right, see you next week. Bye-bye.